The Eon Voyager was an engineering marvel. If by marvel you meant a cobbled-together monstrosity that looked as if it had been designed by a committee of drunk, particularly devious space engineers. A generation ship tasked with mining asteroids, it housed thousands of souls, all of whom were pretty sure they were better off than their ancestors who'd stayed on Earth, which had been doing a pretty convincing job of dying for the last few centuries. "I don't know why they thought it'd work," Arkin muttered, staring at the tangled mess of wires that constituted the mind-merge interface. It was as if someone had tried to merge a vintage toaster with the mainframe of a retired warship, forcing everyone to think alike. "Who comes up with this crap?" Sula, sitting on a nearby crate that served as a makeshift throne of sarcasm, smirked. "The kind of people who think they know what's best for us. You know, like politicians and those idiots who design these ships." The mind merge had been a disaster, an attempt to unify thought processes to make mining operations more efficient. Instead, all it did was give everyone a collective headache and a newfound appreciation for individuality. The higher-ups called it a setback, which was corporate speak for "we royally screwed up." "Yeah, because nothing says efficiency like giving everyone the same opinion," she added. "Next, they'll want us all to wear matching jumpsuits and sing Kumbaya." Arkin chuckled darkly. "I'll pass on the matching jumpsuits, thanks. Got enough problems without losing my sense of style." The Eon Voyager's interior was a claustrophobic labyrinth, a place where privacy was a luxury and hope was as scarce as good coffee. The corridors were narrow. The air was recycled so many times it had probably been breathed by everyone at least twice, and the lighting flickered just enough to give everything that special dystopian charm. "Hey, you hear about the latest shipment from Earth?" Sula asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer would be disappointing. "Let me guess," Arkin sighed. "More powdered food and recycled motivational posters, bingo, and another lecture on teamwork. Because that's what we need, more lectures," Sula replied, rolling her eyes. Arkin took a deep breath, letting it out in a long, resigned sigh. "There's got to be something better out there than this." "What? Like a life without constant existential dread?" Sula shrugged. "Unlikely. Besides, we're the lucky ones, out here mining rocks, breathing canned air, hoping our ship doesn't turn into a coffin." "What a time to be alive," Arkin said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. They both knew the ship was a microcosm of humanity's finest and most flawed. The people on board were a mixed bag of misfits, dreamers, and those just unlucky enough to have been born in the wrong place at the wrong time. The mind-merge debacle had only exacerbated the tension simmering beneath the surface, like a pressure cooker waiting to blow its lid. "You think they'll try the mind-merge again?" Sula asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in her voice. "I hope not, but you know these guys. They love a good experiment, especially when it's not their brains on the line," Arkin replied. "And if it goes wrong again," Arkin shrugged, "then we all get another round of migraines and existential crises." The ship shuddered suddenly, a reminder of its age and the constant wear and tear. Arkin steadied himself against the wall, cursing under his breath. "Damn thing's falling apart. Just like everything else," Sula said, standing up and brushing imaginary dust from her pants. "Come on, let's see if we can find something that isn't breaking down or trying to kill us." They wandered through the corridors, past fellow crew members who wore expressions of quiet resolve and grim acceptance. Everyone was just trying to survive another day, to make sense of their place in the grand scheme of things or lack thereof. "You ever wonder if there's more to life than this?" Arkin asked suddenly, his voice almost lost in the hum of machinery. Sula looked at him, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Sure. But then I remember that life is mostly disappointment with a side order of pain, and I figure I'm about as well off here as anywhere." Arkin laughed, a genuine sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You've got a point there." They reached the ship's observation deck, a place where one could almost pretend they weren't stuck inside a giant metal coffin scraping dust off asteroids. The stars stretched out before them, indifferent and eternal. Beautiful, isn't it? Sula said, gesturing to the vast expanse beyond the ship's thick windows. In a cold, uncaring kind of way, Arkin replied. Makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Yeah, like a hug from a black hole, Sula chuckled. They stood there in silence, two humans against the universe, each lost in their own thoughts. The stars were a reminder of the endless possibilities and the crushing insignificance of their existence. You think we'll ever reach the end of this mission? Arkin mused. Probably not, Sula said with a shrug. But maybe we'll get close enough to pretend we did. Isn't that what life's all about? Faking it till you make it? Arkin nodded. I guess so. Here's to faking it then. To faking it, Sula echoed, clinking her imaginary glass against his. The ship shuddered again, a gentle reminder that even in the vastness of space, there was no escaping the practical matters of maintaining a rickety vessel. We should probably check on that, Arkin said, turning away from the stars. Sula sighed dramatically. Always with the work, never with the fun. In this place. Fun's a dangerous luxury, Arkin replied. But there was a hint of a smile on his lips, a small rebellion against the darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. They walked side by side, back into the bowels of the ship where duty awaited them like an old, unwelcome friend. As they moved, Arkin couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface, something more than broken wires and malfunctioning machines. The failed mind merge had unearthed fears and doubts, leaving everyone just a little more on edge, a little more likely to snap. What do you think happens if we can't fix everything? Sula asked suddenly, her voice low. Then we improvise, Arkin said with a wry grin. We're good at that, remember? Yeah, Sula agreed. We're the best at making do with what we've got. Even if what we've got is utter crap. Especially then, Arkin nodded, his expression turning serious. Just keep an eye out, okay? Things feel off. You mean more off than usual, Sula quipped. Exactly, Arkin said, shooting her a knowing look. They reached the engineering bay, a hive of activity and the closest thing to a heart that the Eon Voyager had. The air buzzed with the sound of tools and the chatter of engineers, all working tirelessly to keep the ship running, to keep hope alive in a place where hope was often a four-letter word. Back to the grind, Sula said as they entered the chaos. Home sweet home, Arkin replied, picking up a wrench and joining the fray. The work was never-ending, a constant battle against entropy and the limitations of human ingenuity. But in that struggle, there was a camaraderie, a shared understanding that they were all in it together, for better or worse. Over the hum of machinery, Arkin caught snippets of conversation, rumors about the mind merge and whispers of possible sabotage. It was hard to know what was real and what was paranoia, but it was enough to keep everyone on edge. You hear what they are saying? Sula asked, leaning in close so only he could hear. Yeah, Arkin replied. You think there's any truth to it? Could be, Sula said. But in this place, who knows? Arkin nodded. Best keep our eyes open, just in case. As they worked, the weight of their situation pressed down on them like the artificial gravity that kept their feet planted on the ship's metal floors. There was no escape, no easy way out. Just the endless cycle of work and fleeting moments of joy stolen in between. But for now, they could pretend. Pretend that things would get better, that their efforts would pay off, that the ship wouldn't turn into a giant, spinning coffin. Hey, Arkin, Sula called out, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Yeah, you ever think we'll see Earth again? Arkin paused, considering the question. Honestly, I hope not. Last I heard, it wasn't exactly a vacation spot. Sula laughed, a sound that seemed to lighten the oppressive air. Right, here's to not going back then. To not going back, Arkin agreed, grateful for her humor, for the momentary distraction from the weight of their reality. They worked side by side, two souls adrift in the cosmos, clinging to what little hope they could muster. Because in a universe that cared nothing for them, all they had was each other and the determination to keep going, come what may. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Eon Voyager's bridge was a study in organized chaos. The kind of chaos that only comes from cramming thousands of people into a metal box floating through the void. It was where the ship's so-called leadership gathered to pretend they had any idea how to handle the fallout from the mind merge fiasco. Captain Jorvik, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, paced like a caged animal. His uniform was wrinkled and his expression screamed, "I'd rather be drinking." "All right, let's get this over with," he grumbled, glancing around at the motley crew of department heads. They were a mix of competence and desperation, like a crew of B-list actors trying to put on a Broadway show. "I assume everyone's aware of the disturbances," Jorvik continued, looking for someone to nod so he could feel marginally in control. "Psychological disturbances," corrected Dr. Ordez, the ship's psychiatrist, who had aged a decade in the past week. "We've seen increased anxiety, paranoia, and agitation. The mind merge did a real number on our crew's sanity." "No shit," muttered Lieutenant Brandt, head of security, whose eyes constantly scanned for threats, real or imagined. "Got people thinking the ship's haunted or some crap." "Haunted by corporate stupidity," Dr. Ordez said dryly. "But even that has its limits. What's the plan then?" asked Jorvik, sounding like he was ordering takeout. "We need some damage control before this whole thing goes up like a bloody supernova. We're keeping an eye on the more agitated individuals," Ordez suggested. "But it's a band-aid solution. And what about the rumors of a revolt?" Brandt leaned forward, his voice low, as if the walls might be listening. "We've got miners whispering about it in the corridors." "Revolt?" Jorvik snorted. "What are they gonna do, strike? Refuse to mine asteroids? Let's see how long they last without the ship's resources." Brandt shrugged. "Desperate people do desperate things." "Let them get desperate," Jorvik said, dismissing the idea with a wave. "We'll handle it." In another part of the ship, Arkin and Sula were handling things in their own way, snooping around like a pair of curious cats in a dog pound. They'd heard the rumors too, and they weren't the sort to ignore a good mystery, especially when it involved potential explosions or mutiny. "So where do we start?" Sula asked, twisting a strand of hair around her finger like she was deciding between two equally bad ideas. "Well," Arkin said, scratching his head, "we could talk to Dr. Ordez. He's been dealing with all the mind merge fallout. Might know something about why everyone's ready to lose their minds. Or we could start with the angry mob," Sula suggested. "Get to know our future overlords." "Let's keep that as plan B," Arkin said with a half-smile. "I'd rather not get lynched today." They made their way to the medbay where Dr. Ordez's office was a cluttered sanctuary of chaos. Papers, data tablets, and empty coffee cups made up most of the decor. The doctor himself looked like he'd been up for days, and he probably had been, given the dark circles under his eyes. "You're here to see if I've gone mad too?" Ordez asked, raising an eyebrow as they entered. "Just here for some advice, Doc," Arkin said, doing his best to sound like he wasn't about to start a fight club. "Can you tell us what's really going on?" Sula asked, leaning against the doorframe in that casual way that suggested she could bolt if things got too weird. "Everyone's twitchy, and the way I hear it, it's not just the recycled air getting to them." Ordez sighed, rubbing his temples. "The mind merge was traumatic for some. You take a system designed to unify thought and cram it into human brains without considering individual quirks, and you get chaos. Corporate brilliance at its finest," Sula quipped. Arkin leaned forward. "But why the revolt talk? People have been angry before, but this feels different." "It is different," Ordez admitted. "The merge didn't just fail, it exposed everyone to each other's worst fears, insecurities, and resentments. Now those are simmering beneath the surface. Like a boiling pot with a lid about to pop," Sula added helpfully. "Exactly," Ordez replied. "And when you're in a confined space with no escape, those emotions become volatile, dangerous." Arkin exchanged a look with Sula. The situation was precarious, but it also made a warped kind of sense. They thanked the doctor and left, their minds spinning with the implications. "So we're sitting on a powder keg," Sula said as they walked down the corridor, the ship's hum their only witness. "What do we do with that?" "Keep our heads down, ears open, and maybe a fire extinguisher handy," Arkin suggested. We need to know who's leading this revolt talk, and maybe keep an eye out for anything that looks like a match, Sula said, grinning despite the seriousness. Because if this ship goes up in flames, I'd like to be far away from the blast zone. Agreed, Arkin nodded. Let's see if we can find someone willing to spill the beans. Their investigation took them to the lower decks where the miners congregated. The air was thick with tension and the unmistakable scent of people ready to snap. They kept to the shadows, listening to chatter about grievances, unfair working conditions, and the leadership's ineptitude. Seems like a real party down here, Sula whispered, her eyes scanning the crowd. Think we'll find a guest of honor? One can hope, Arkin replied, his own gaze searching for anyone who looked like they were in charge, or at least thought they were. After some discreet inquiries and a few awkward conversations with people who clearly didn't trust them, they stumbled across a group huddled around what passed for a table in the mess hall. A man with a scar across his cheek seemed to be the center of attention, and Arkin recognized him as Jerk, a miner known for his outspoken disdain for authority. Look who decided to join us, Jerk said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was used to being listened to. What brings you two upstanding citizens down here? Curiosity, Sula said with a shrug, her expression carefully neutral. Heard there's talk of change in the air. Jerk's eyes narrowed. Change, huh? You could say that. People are tired of being treated like disposable tools. Arkin stepped forward. And what are you proposing? Revolution? Coup? Seems risky. Everything's risky, Jerk said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. But doing nothing is a sure way to keep getting shafted. Sula glanced at Arkin, then back to Jerk. So what's the plan? You've got people talking, but words are cheap. Jerk leaned back, studying them. You really want to know? We wouldn't be here if we didn't, Arkin replied. Jerk nodded, gesturing for them to come closer. All right, here's the deal. We've got some folks who know things about the ship's systems. We're thinking a little. Demonstration might get the higher-ups to listen. A demonstration? Sula's voice was skeptical. You mean sabotage? Jerk shrugged. Call it what you want, we call it leverage. Arkin felt a chill run down his spine. The situation was more volatile than he'd realized. He exchanged another glance with Sula, who looked equally concerned. Just be careful, Arkin said, his voice low. A demonstration can easily turn into a disaster. Jerk's expression softened slightly, but his resolve was clear. We know what we're doing. Just keep your eyes open. Things are about to get interesting. With that, Arkin and Sula took their leave, their minds racing with the implications of what they'd learned. The ship was indeed a powder keg, and the fuse was getting shorter by the minute. Well, Sula said once they were out of earshot, that went about as well as expected. Yeah, Arkin replied, rubbing the back of his neck. Let's just hope we're not around when the fireworks start. Hope's a dangerous thing, Sula said with a wry smile. But I guess it's all we've got. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them, but there was a strange exhilaration in it too. The kind that came from knowing they were right in the thick of it, whether they wanted to be or not. As they made their way back to their quarters, Arkin couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something big, something that could either save them all or send them spiraling into chaos. Hey, Arkin, Sula said suddenly, breaking the silence. If this all goes south, you got a backup plan. Arkin chuckled, though it was a humorless sound. Yeah, find the nearest escape pod and pray it still works. Sounds like a plan, Sula agreed, her grin a small rebellion against the encroaching darkness. They reached their quarters and settled in for the night, both knowing sleep would be elusive. The ship shuddered again, a reminder of its age and the precarious balance they were all trying to maintain. But for now, they had each other, and sometimes that was enough. Just barely enough to keep the darkness at bay for one more day in the vast, uncaring universe. The ship's corridors were buzzing with the kind of energy you'd expect from a hive full of bees that had just discovered their queen was actually a wasp in disguise. Arkin and Sula, navigated the dimly lit passageways with the ease of professional gamblers scouting a new casino. They had a lead, and it was time to pull on the thread and see if this whole yarn ball of conspiracy would unravel. "Think anyone up top's actually got a clue what's going down?" Sula asked, her voice echoing off the metal walls. "Wouldn't bet on it," Arkin replied, sidestepping a maintenance bot that had decided to take a nap in the middle of the hall. "They're probably too busy arguing about whose job it is to deal with the fallout," Sula snorted. "If they put as much effort into leading as they do into passing the buck, we might not be in this mess." They reached the tech lab, a place as sterile and inviting as a tax audit. Inside, the walls were lined with screens displaying data that would have been fascinating if they weren't so damn inscrutable. They were here to talk to Meyerla, the ship's tech guru who had a knack for making the impossible seem merely improbable. Meyerla was hunched over a console, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the kind of precision that suggested she was born with a keyboard in hand. She glanced up as they entered, her expression somewhere between amused and exhausted. "Let me guess," she said without preamble, "you're here about the great mind merge debacle." "Bingo," Arkin said, pulling up a chair and straddling it like he was about to give a motivational speech. "We heard a little birdie say there might have been some tinkering involved." Meyerla leaned back, her chair creaking in protest. "Tinkering? More like someone decided to play God and forgot they didn't have a license." "So, what happened?" Sula asked, leaning against a console like she was at a bar, waiting for her drink. "And who's our lovely tinkerer?" Meyerla tapped a few keys, bringing up a screen filled with code that looked like the alphabet had gone on a bender. The interface was designed to be overly ambitious. But what's interesting is someone introduced a feedback loop that wasn't part of the original design. It amplified the negative emotions, made everyone's worst nightmares front and center. Arkin frowned. "So, someone wanted us all to go a bit mad. Or maybe just enough to keep us from digging too deep," Meyerla suggested. "Keep us fighting among ourselves, too distracted to notice other things going on." "A classic misdirection," Sula said, shaking her head. "Just what we need in a floating tin can with limited exits. The question is, who benefits from this chaos?" Arkin pondered aloud. Meyerla shrugged. "Someone with a stake in keeping everyone off balance. Could be internal, could be someone with ties to corporate back home." "Great," Sula said, rolling her eyes. "Our saboteur could be anyone from a disgruntled janitor to the CEO. Got any way to narrow it down?" Arkin asked Meyerla, hopeful for some magic bullet that would solve their problems. "I can dig into the logs, see if there are any unusual access points," Meyerla offered. "But that'll take time and I can't promise anything definitive. We'll take what we can get," Arkin said, standing up. "Thanks, Meyerla," she waved them off. "Anything to keep this ship from turning into a floating asylum." Leaving Meyerla to her digital detective work, Arkin and Sula headed back into the corridors. The constant hum of the ship was a reminder of its age and the tension that was as thick in the air as the recycled oxygen. "So, we've got sabotage, a potential revolt, and leadership too busy with their heads in the sand," Arkin summarized. "What a lovely bouquet of problems." "Don't forget the impending doom and gloom," Sula added cheerfully. "Gives it that extra kick." Their next stop was a not-so-secret gathering of miners, who had taken to holding clandestine meetings in a cargo bay that was officially listed as under maintenance. The kind of maintenance that involved people talking in hushed tones and occasionally glaring at anyone in a uniform. They slipped into the shadows at the back of the room, where the flickering lights gave everyone a ghostly pallor. At the center of the group was Thran, the miners' unofficial spokesman and a man who looked like he could arm wrestle a bear and win. "Brothers, sisters," Thran began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been through hell and lived to tell the tale. "We stand here not in defiance but in demand of our rights." Arkin leaned over to Sula. "He's got the whole revolutionary leader thing down pat. Charismatic, slightly dangerous, and probably smells like machine oil," Sula whispered back. What's not to love? Thran continued, outlining the grievances that had been building since the mind merge experiment went belly up. The miners were fed up with being treated like expendable assets, and the leadership's failure to address their concerns was the final straw. "We're not asking for the moon and stars," Thran declared, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Just the respect and consideration we deserve." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Arkin and Sula exchanged a look. Things were heating up faster than a reactor leak. After the meeting broke up, they lingered until the crowd thinned. Thran noticed them and approached, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Heard you two were snooping around," he said, his gaze appraising but not unfriendly. "Curiosity's a hell of a motivator," Arkin replied. "We're just trying to make sure things don't go from bad to catastrophic." Thran nodded. "We're not looking for a war, just a chance to be heard. But if they won't listen, we get it," Sula said. "But a full-blown revolt might end up with everyone floating out an airlock." Thran's expression hardened. "Desperate times, you know the rest, but I'll try to keep things civil for now." "Appreciated," Arkin said. "And if you hear anything about who might have tampered with the mind merge, let us know." Thran nodded, and with that they left him to his thoughts. The corridors seemed quieter now, the reality of the situation settling over them like a cold fog. They had more questions than answers, and every step seemed to uncover another layer of complexity. Back on the bridge, Captain Jorvik was doing his best impression of a man juggling flaming chainsaws. "Doctor." Ordez was whispering something in his ear, probably another update on the ship's collective mental state, which couldn't have been any more uplifting than a funeral procession. Arkin and Sula approached, earning a glance from Jorvik that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, preferably somewhere with a beach and no responsibility. "We've got news," Arkin said, cutting to the chase. "Someone tampered with the mind merge." "Sabotage," Jorvik let out a long-suffering sigh. "Fantastic, because we didn't have enough on our plate already." "Any leads?" Brant, who was never far from the action, asked from his post at the security console. "Meyerla's looking into it," Sula said, "but it might take time." "We're running out of time," Jorvik grumbled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "If this powder keg goes off, we'll all be looking for new jobs." "Or worse." "Or worse," Arkin echoed, the words hanging heavy in the air. Dr. Ordez chimed in with his usual brand of weary optimism. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I've grown rather fond of my head being attached to my shoulders." The bridge was silent for a moment, everyone lost in their own grim thoughts. Then Jorvik straightened, the weary captain shifting into a man with a mission. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "We need to get ahead of this. Brant, double security on key systems. Ordez, keep an eye on the crew's mental state. Arkin, Sula, sift through the rumors. Find me something solid we can act on." They all nodded, the gravity of the situation pressing down like a black hole. "Guess it's back to the grindstone," Sula muttered as they left the bridge. Arkin gave a humorless chuckle. Just another day on the Eon Voyager. Their investigation was far from over. The ship was a cauldron of discontent, and they were running out of time to cool things down. But like all good stories, this one was far from its conclusion. For now, they'd keep searching for answers because if they didn't, who would? As they walked away, Arkin mused aloud. "You ever get the feeling we're just small gears in a machine that's about to blow?" Sula grinned, her irreverence shining through. "Yeah, but at least we're the gears with front row seats to the show." And with that, they plunged back into the heart of the ship, determined to navigate the chaos with their usual flair for the sarcastically dramatic. In the depths of the Eon Voyager, where the hum of machinery was as constant as the crew's griping, things were about to take a turn for the worse. Thran and his merry band of miners had decided to stage a symbolic act of defiance. You know, something subtle like throwing a wrench into the ship's delicate ecosystem. Literally. "Why a wrench?" Sula asked, arms crossed as she leaned against the wall of Arkin's cramped quarters. "Why not, I dunno, a paperclip or something less metaphorically obvious?" Arkin shrugged. dealing out cards for a game neither of them had any intention of finishing. Guess they figured subtleties for people who aren't planning revolutions, or maybe they just wanted to see if the damn thing would make a better spaceship than this bucket. The miners had chosen their target well, the water filtration system. The wrench jammed the works, causing a backup that turned the showers into geysers and the drinking water into something best described as chunky. If the miners wanted attention, they'd gotten it, and in spades. Over in the bridge, Captain Jorvik looked like someone had told him his favorite puppy had run off with his least favorite ex. The bridge had erupted into organized chaos, with alarms blaring and Dr. Ordes valiantly attempting to maintain some semblance of calm. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Arkin said as he and Sula strolled into the chaos. "You've reached a new low in water quality, Captain." Jorvik shot him a look that could have melted steel. "We're dealing with it. What news do you have?" Arkin leaned against a console, adopting his usual slouch of nonchalance. "Seems Thran and his lot decided to put on a little show. They're not happy with being ignored." "Understatement of the century," Sula chimed in, perching on the edge of a chair. "Next, they'll be rearranging the air processors to smell like something out of Jorvik's bathroom." "Noted," Jorvik said, voice tight with barely suppressed frustration. "We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control." Lieutenant Brandt, ever the harbinger of bad news, appeared at the captain's side. "Security's been doubled, but it's not enough. People are getting restless." "Restless?" Arkin snorted. "More like one good shove from mutiny." "In that case," Jorvik replied, "find a way to shove back, quietly. We can't afford a full-scale revolt." As they turned to leave, Dr. Ordes caught Arkin's eye. "And you too," he said, tone weary but determined. "Keep digging. If there's a brain behind this madness, we need to know." Arkin gave a mock salute. "Digging's what we do best. Just, don't expect us to like what we find." They left the bridge, the sound of Jorvik's frustrated orders echoing behind them. In the corridors, the crew buzzed with rumors and irritation, a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And as luck would have it, Arkin and Sula were heading right toward the matchbox. Their footsteps echoed in the metal corridors until they reached the tech lab, where Myrla was in her usual state of controlled chaos. She looked up, eyes glinting with a mix of irritation and amusement. "Heard the miners are making waves," she said, gesturing at a screen where water filtration stats looked like a particularly bad heart monitor. "Figuratively and literally," Sula replied. "We've got a bad feeling someone higher up might be pulling strings." Myrla raised an eyebrow. "Higher up? You mean aside from Jorvik and his merry band of the clueless?" Arkin nodded, pulling up a chair. "Got any breadcrumbs for us?" "Depends," Myrla said, tapping a few keys and bringing up a log full of access dates and times. "How do you feel about bread made from pure speculation?" "Delicious," Arkin said, studying the data. "Especially when it comes with a side of conspiracy." Myrla pointed at a specific entry. "This here, an unscheduled access by someone with high clearance." "Could be an error, but I doubt it." "Anyone we know?" Sula asked, leaning in to get a closer look. "Could be," Myrla replied cryptically. "But given the way the system's been tinkered with, I'd say whoever it is knows their way around our tech better than most." Arkin and Sula exchanged glances. "Sounds like one of Jorvik's inner circle might be having extracurricular activities," Arkin mused. "Or maybe someone with a vested interest in us not asking too many questions," Sula added. "A corporate spy, maybe." "Ordes is always mumbling about the mental state of the crew," Arkin said, playing with the idea. "Makes you wonder if he's covering for someone." Myrla smirked. "Or maybe he's just one bad day from starting a cult." "Wouldn't be the weirdest thing on this ship," Arkin muttered. "Thanks for the lead, Myrla. We'll take it from here. Just make sure it doesn't blow up in your faces," she called after them as they left the lab, her voice laced with sardonic cheer. Back in the corridors, Arkin and Sula looked more like conspirators than investigators. They knew they were getting closer to the truth, but like everything on the Eon Voyager, that truth was wrapped in layers of bureaucracy and bullshit. "So who do we start with?" Sula asked as they reached one of the ship's many recreational areas, currently deserted thanks to the water crisis. Ordez, Arkin decided, recalling the doctor's constant presence and his penchant for looking guilty as sin. He's always in the thick of things, and I'd bet my last credit he knows more than he's letting on. They found Dr. Ordez in his cramped office, surrounded by files and data screens. He looked up as they entered, his expression a mix of curiosity and weariness. "More questions?" he asked, gesturing for them to sit. "More answers, we hope," Arkin said, accepting the invite. "We're looking into some unusual activity with the mind merge interface logs." Ordez's face didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "You think I'm involved?" "Not directly," Sula said. "But you've got a front row seat to the crew's mental state. Seems like a good place to start." Ordez sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm not your man. My only crime is trying to keep this ship from turning into a floating madhouse. But I can tell you this, someone's been meddling with the crew's psychological profiles, and it's not me." "Any idea who?" Arkin pressed, leaning forward. "Wish I did," Ordez replied. "I've got my suspicions, but nothing concrete. If you're looking for a name, try digging into the upper echelons. Someone with a vested interest in keeping things chaotic." "Thanks, Doc," Sula said, standing up. "We'll keep it in mind." As they left Ordez's office, Arkin couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The ship was a powder keg, and whoever was behind the sabotage was holding the match with a steady hand. The corridors seemed to close in around them as they made their way back to their quarters. The tension in the air was palpable, a living thing that wound itself around every conversation and interaction. "We've got to figure this out before it all goes to hell," Arkin said, his voice unusually serious. Sula nodded. "We're getting close, but I can't shake the feeling we're still missing something. Something big." "Just need to keep digging," Arkin said, trying to muster some optimism. "Even if it means getting our hands dirtier than usual." Their resolve set, they spent the next few hours sifting through data and trying to piece together the puzzle. The ship felt like a different creature now, its familiar corridors and rooms tinged with an underlying menace that hadn't been there before. As they worked, the realization hit them both. They were dealing with more than just a disgruntled worker or a rogue AI. This was something far bigger, with implications that could reach beyond the Eon Voyager and into the corporate offices back home. The more they unraveled, the more it became clear that the ship's problems were just the tip of the iceberg. As they sat in their cramped quarters, surrounded by monitors and the weight of their task, Arkin made a decision. "We won't stop," he said, his voice firm despite the exhaustion lurking at its edges. "No matter what it takes, we'll get to the bottom of this." Sula nodded, determination etched across her features. "And when we do, maybe we can finally get some damn peace and quiet around here." But for now, peace was a distant dream. The Eon Voyager was a ship on the edge, its fate resting in the hands of those willing to delve into its darkest secrets. As Arkin and Sula pressed on, they knew one thing for certain: this story was far from over. They were players in a game with stakes higher than any they'd ever faced before, and the outcome was anything but certain. The Eon Voyager was on the brink, like a drunken tightrope walker with a death wish. Arkin and Sula had barely managed to slip into one of the countless storage bays when they heard the telltale clomp of Lieutenant Brant's boots echoing through the corridors. Brant was as subtle as a sledgehammer in a china shop, but with the added bonus of a permanent scowl that made his face look like it was in a perpetual state of constipation. "Lovely," Sula muttered, peeking through a crack in the door. "Nothing like a manhunt to spice up a Tuesday." Arkin leaned back against a crate labeled spare fuses, totally not explosives. He wished he could swap places with one of those fuses. At least they knew their purpose in life. You'd think they'd give us a medal for trying to prevent a mutiny. But no, it's all we need someone to blame, so it might as well be you. We're at the top of the suspect list. Sitting pretty, Sula replied, rolling her eyes. "Sometimes I think this ship was designed specifically to be a cosmic joke. Wouldn't that make Jorvik the punchline? Sula snorted. More like the setup. They had uncovered enough digital breadcrumbs to bake a conspiracy loaf, and it left a sour taste. The mind merge failure wasn't a hiccup. It was a weapon. Someone had rigged it to amplify traumas, turning the crew into a simmering pot of psychological stew. Pinning down the mastermind was the tricky part, especially when the walls had ears and the corridors had eyes, Brant's eyes to be specific. Their new status as ship fugitives meant cozying up with the shadows, waiting for the right moment to slip through the cracks and find a way to warn Thran and his band of disenfranchised miners. Not that Thran was likely to listen. The man was a walking cliché of righteous anger with a side of delusions of grandeur. "Think he'll believe us?" Arkin asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at him. Thran, huh? "Convincing him is about as likely as getting a cat to love a bath," Sula replied. "But we've got to try. Otherwise, this ship's going to implode faster than Jorvik's career prospects. Maybe we should have just taken up knitting," Arkin mused. "Less chance of getting shot." Their hushed conversation was interrupted by a faint thud, Brant's heavy boots fading into the distance. Arkin opened the door a crack, peering out to ensure the coast was clear. "All right, let's move," he said, gesturing Sula forward. Before Brant decides to up his game with an actual brain. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the ship's tension was palpable, a thick soup of anxiety and suspicion. Arkin half expected the walls to start sweating, the very metal groaning under the weight of the crew's collective unrest. The miners' quarters were located in the bowels of the ship, a fitting metaphor for how the higher-ups viewed them. Arkin and Sula moved quickly, their footsteps a soft patter in the industrial silence. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a maintenance bot that seemed determined to take another nap in the middle of the hall. "Lazy bastard," Arkin muttered, stepping around it. They reached Thran's domain, a makeshift meeting area that looked more like a union rally gone wrong. The miners sat or stood in clumps, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and rebellion. Thran himself was at the center, holding court like a king without a kingdom. "Look what the cat dragged in," Thran said, spotting them. "Or should I say the rat's charming as ever," Thran, Sula quipped. "We need to talk. Privately, why? Planning on joining our little uprising?" Thran's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Or here to spy on us for Jorvik Arkenside? Look, you can cut the theatrics. We've got info." The mind merge wasn't just a botched job. It was sabotage. Thran crossed his arms, skeptical but intrigued. "Sabotage, huh? And why should I believe you? Because if we're right, pushing this revolt might sink the entire bloody ship," Sula said, her voice steady. "And I'm pretty sure that's not on anyone's bucket list." Thran considered them for a moment, his expression a mix of suspicion and grudging respect. "All right, you've got 5 minutes. Convince me." As they laid out their findings, the atmosphere shifted, the miners' anger giving way to whispered doubts and uneasy glances. Thran listened, his skepticism peeling away layer by layer until it was replaced by something else: fear. "You're serious," he said finally, voice low. "We go through with this and the ship's done for." Arkin nodded. "And not in a blaze of glory either. More like a slow, painful death." Thran rubbed his temples, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like lead. "Hell, this wasn't the plan. Plans change," Sula said. "What matters is what you do next." The miners were silent, the gravity of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just about better conditions or sticking it to the man. It was survival, plain and simple. "We need to regroup," Thran said finally, looking to his people. "Spread the word. No more hasty decisions." As the miners disbanded, muttering amongst themselves, Thran turned back to Arkin and Sula. "You've given us a lot to think about. But this fight isn't over. If we're going to take control of this ship, we need to do it smart." "Smart's a good plan," Arkin said. "Preferably one without holes the size of Brant's ego." Thran cracked a smile, a rare sight. "Thanks for the heads up. Just don't expect us to roll over and play nice." "We wouldn't dream of it," Sula replied, glancing at Arkin. "Come on, let's get out of here before someone decides we're better off as scapegoats." They left the miners' quarters with a newfound urgency. The ship was a tinderbox and they were holding the match. One wrong move and everything could go up in flames. Their path back was a twisted waltz through dimly lit corridors, each step an exercise in paranoia. Brandt's security teams were out in force, their presence a stark reminder of the ever-tightening noose around their necks. "Think we did enough?" Sula asked as they reached a quieter section of the ship. "We did what we could," Arkin replied, a hint of doubt creeping into his voice. "Now we just have to keep our heads down and hope Thran doesn't decide to go kamikaze." "Hope's a dangerous thing," Sula said, her tone wry. "But I guess it's all we've got right now." They slipped into their quarters, the door hissing shut behind them. It was a temporary sanctuary in a ship teetering on the brink of chaos. "Now what?" Sula asked, glancing at the mess of data sprawled across their desks. Arkin shrugged, exhaustion pulling at his features. "We keep digging. There's more to this mess than just the mind merge. If we're going to stop this ship from tearing itself apart, we need to find out who's really pulling the strings." "Great," Sula said, collapsing into a chair. "Another day, another conspiracy to unravel. Just once I'd like to deal with a problem that can be solved with duct tape." Arkin chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "In a perfect world, maybe. But this isn't a perfect world. It's the Eon Voyager," Sula sighed, rubbing her temples. "Well, at least we're not bored, right?" "Yeah, just drowning in a sea of intrigue and potential death," Arkin replied. "But who needs a cushy desk job when you've got this kind of excitement?" They shared a moment of weary camaraderie, the kind that only comes from knowing you're standing on the edge with nothing but each other to keep from falling. But as they settled in to continue their investigation, the ship around them seemed to groan under the weight of its secrets. And Arkin couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they uncovered next might just be the key to saving them all, or the final nail in the coffin. The tension on the Eon Voyager was thicker than canned soup, the kind with questionable ingredients and an aftertaste of regret. Arkin and Sula found themselves in a tight squeeze, and not just metaphorically. The ship's corridors felt suffocating, as if the walls had shrunk to hug them, an unwelcome embrace from a ship teetering on insanity. "Remind me why we're doing this again," Sula asked, her voice a whisper as they slipped past the eerily attentive maintenance bot, which now looked like it might actually be awake. "Because we drew the short straw for brains," Arkin replied with a sardonic grin. "Or maybe because it beats sitting around with our thumbs up our asses while the ship goes kaboom." "Right," Sula muttered. "As if this place isn't already an asylum in space." Their mission was straightforward as a tangled ball of yarn. Get to the communications array, broadcast their findings to the entire ship, and hope it didn't end in a pyrotechnic display of human error and hubris. The miners' quarters were behind them, but the sense of urgency clung like static. The revolt was a creeping inevitability, like indigestion after a dodgy meal. Thran and his merry band of disgruntled miners were about to light a match on the powder keg, and Arkin and Sula were holding the only fire extinguisher. The problem was, it might just spray lighter fluid. Navigating the labyrinthine hallways, they evaded Brandt's security patrols with all the grace of an elephant in a tutu, but somehow managed to stay unseen. It was probably a testament to the ship's piss-poor lighting, or Brandt's inability to find his own ass with 2 hands and a navigation map. Not that Arkin was complaining. They reached the tech lab, a sterile haven in a sea of chaos. Myrla, the ship's tech guru, was the gatekeeper. If anyone could rig the communications array to blast their revelations ship-wide, it was her. Myrla was hunched over a data screen, eyes flicking over lines of code like they were her favorite soap opera. She glanced up as they entered, her expression a blend of surprise and mild irritation. "Arkin, Sula, to what do I owe the pleasure? Or should I call security now and save time?" Sula flashed a grin. "We need a favor." "Of course you do," Myrla replied, rolling her eyes. "And here I thought you were just dropping by for a chat." "We've got info," Arkin said, leaning in conspiratorially. "The mind merge fiasco, it was sabotage. Myrla raised an eyebrow. Not just incompetence, color me shocked. Yeah, but we've got proof, Sula chimed in. And we need to broadcast it, before the miners decide to play revolution or bust. Myrla considered them, tapping a pen against her lips. And what makes you think stirring this particular pot won't boil over in your faces? Because if we don't, we're all screwed, Arkin said. And not in the fun way. Myrla sighed, swiveling in her chair. Fine, but if this goes south, I'm blaming you too. And I'll make sure it's written on your gravestones. Deal, Sula replied with a wink. But you'll have to make do with an epitaph on a floating chunk of debris. With Myrla's begrudging assistance, they set to work. The array was a delicate piece of tech, as fickle as a cat, and just as likely to claw your face off if you touched it wrong. But Myrla had a way with machines, coaxing them to life with sweet nothings and the occasional percussive maintenance. The plan was simple: hijack the array, broadcast the truth. Easy on paper, but paper didn't have to deal with Lieutenant Brandt or a ship on the verge of imploding under its own stupidity. Ready? Myrla asked, fingers hovering over the console. Ready as we'll ever be, Arkin replied, a pit of unease settling in his stomach. Do it. Myrla tapped a sequence on the console and the communications array hummed to life with a soft whir. It was now or never, and Arkin felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, unseen but all too real. Attention, everyone, Arkin began, his voice steady over the ship-wide comms. This is Arkin. I know some of you have questions about the mind merge failure. We've discovered it was no accident. The system was sabotaged to amplify traumas, turning us against each other. We have proof, and it's time to stop this madness before it's too late. Sula picked up the thread. The revolt you're planning, it's exactly what whoever did this wants. We need to pull together, not tear each other apart. There was a pause as their message broadcast across the ship, a ripple of uncertainty spreading through the ranks. Even from inside the tech lab, they could almost feel the collective intake of breath. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, until it shattered with the blaring of alarms. The revolt had begun in earnest, and it wasn't a slow burn. It was a flashfire of chaos, spreading through the ship with all the grace of a drunk elephant at a fancy dinner. Great, Myrla muttered. Just when things were getting dull. Arkin exchanged a glance with Sula, a silent understanding passing between them. They nodded to Myrla, their appreciation unspoken but clear. Then they bolted from the lab, the corridors a blur of metal and adrenaline. The ship was alive with movement, crew members scrambling, alarms wailing like a banshee choir. Brandt's security teams were mobilizing, their approach anything but subtle. It was a race against time, and Arkin wasn't sure where the finish line was, only that it was speeding closer with every heartbeat. They ducked into a side corridor, breathless and wary. The ship trembled beneath their feet, a reminder of the impending storm. Think it worked? Sula asked, her voice barely audible over the din. Only if people are smarter than they look, Arkin replied. So maybe. If not, we're back to being the ship's favorite scapegoats, Sula said. And I left my sacrificial lamb outfit in my other wardrobe. They navigated the corridors, the ship's pulse erratic and unpredictable. It was a symphony of chaos, every note a reminder of how close they were to the brink. Reaching a maintenance hatch, Arkin pulled it open, motioning for Sula to follow. Inside was a cramped network of service tunnels, a hidden artery running through the ship's mechanical heart. It was their best bet for staying off Brandt's radar, which was about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. We need to get to the bridge, Arkin said, crawling into the tunnel. If we're going to stop this, we need to get through to Jorvik. Sure, Sula replied, squeezing in behind him, because he's always so receptive to bad news. They moved through the tunnels, the metal enclosing them like a coffin. It was a claustrophobic journey, but the alternative was a return to Brandt's tender mercies, and neither of them fancied that. The bridge was their destination, a beacon of relative safety, if one ignored the minor detail of it being the center of command for a rapidly deteriorating situation. Bursting from the tunnels, they found themselves at the threshold of the bridge. It was a maelstrom of activity, crew members shouting, consoles flashing, and Captain Jorvik at the eye of the storm, barking orders like a man with too many fires and not enough extinguishers. "Captain," Arkin called, pushing through the chaos. Jorvik turned, his expression a mix of annoyance and relief. "Arkin, Sula. I assume you've got an explanation for the circus act." "More like a reason," Sula replied, crossing her arms. "This whole mess, it's sabotage, and the revolt's just making it worse." Jorvik's gaze hardened, skepticism warring with curiosity. "You think I don't know that, but stopping it's another matter." "That's why we're here," Arkin said, urgency in his voice. "We've got proof. You just need to get through to the crew before Brant starts cracking skulls." Jorvik considered them, the weight of command pressing down like a physical force. He nodded, a reluctant agreement. "Fine, but if this goes sideways, it's on your heads." "Wouldn't want it any other way," Arkin replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Jorvik turned to the comms officer, directing them to patch through to the ship's PA. The tension in the room was palpable, everyone holding their breath as they waited for the next move. "Attention, crew of the Eon Voyager," Jorvik's voice echoed through the ship. "This is your captain speaking. What you've heard is true. We're dealing with sabotage of the mind merge system. We need to stand together, not tear each other apart. I'm calling for a ceasefire, effective immediately." The words hung in the air, the ship a taut wire strung between chaos and order. Arkin and Sula exchanged a glance, hope and fear intertwining in a fragile dance. The comms buzzed with responses, confusion and resolve mingling in the chorus of voices. It was a turning point, tenuous as a dream, but there was a chance. A chance to avert disaster if cooler heads prevailed. "Let's see if they listen," Jorvik said, a hint of a challenge in his tone. "Or if we're all going down with this ship." "Whatever happens," Arkin replied, "at least we can't say we didn't try." "Yeah," Sula added, her smile wry and weary. "Because what's life without a little impending doom to spice things up?" As the ship's collective breath stilled, caught in the balance between revolt and reason, Arkin felt a flicker of hope. It was a small thing, easily extinguished, but it was enough to light the way forward. For now. The Eon Voyager's bridge was a cacophony of alarms, shouts, and the distant but unmistakable sound of a revolt that wasn't taking a break for tea. As Arkin and Sula stood with Captain Jorvik, absorbing the backlash of their broadcast, it felt a bit like standing in the eye of a hurricane, if hurricanes could be pissed off and equipped with semi-automatic weapons. "So, where's our saboteur?" Sula asked, arms crossed like she was about to start a lecture on how not to start a bloody mutiny on a spaceship. Arkin gave a half-shrug. "If I was the kind of person who sabotaged mind merges to amplify the crew's collective nightmares, I'd probably be somewhere smug and unreachable, or dead," Jorvik added, ever the optimist. "Sounds like the kind of guy who'd enjoy his own funeral," Myrla snarked, having joined them with a look that suggested she'd rather be anywhere but here. The bridge door hissed open, and Dr. Ordez stumbled in, looking like he'd just crawled out of a bar fight. "Captain, it's chaos out there. The miners are splitting like someone shouted free booze in a dry county." "Fantastic," Jorvik replied dryly. "Maybe we can solve this with a drinking contest." Arkin leaned on a console, the weight of decisions pressing down like a particularly unfriendly elephant. "We need to find the one behind all this before Brant goes full headcracker mode." "Brant's already full headcracker," Myrla muttered, fingers flying over her tech screen. "Guy's got one speed and it's bulldozer." Sula tapped her foot impatiently. "So who's got the master plan here? Because I'm fresh out." Jorvik sighed, rubbing his temples. "We need to talk to Thran. He's the miners' unofficial head honcho. If we can get him to see reason, maybe the others will follow." "Wouldn't count on it," Sula quipped. "Reason's a rare commodity these days." Jorvik nodded towards the door. "Arkin, Sula, you're up. Go make nice with the miners. You're marginally better at diplomacy than I am." "Marginally," Arkin said with a wry grin. "But hey, who needs charm when you have desperation?" The corridors were a mess. a constant reminder that the Eon Voyager was a generation ship with the lifespan of a bad hangover. As Arkin and Sula made their way to the miners' quarters, the ship's structure groaned above them like it was sharing an inside joke with the universe. "Ever get the feeling we're being watched?" Arkin asked, glancing up at the flickering lights. "Only all the time," Sula replied. "But hey, we're stars in the ship's favorite drama." They reached the miners' quarters to find Thran at the center of a tense gathering. His expression was that of a man who'd just been told his lottery winnings were counterfeit. Arkin, Sula, Thran greeted, voice laced with suspicion. "What brings you to this neck of the ship? Thought we'd drop by for a heart-to-heart," Arkin said. "About that little revolution you've got brewing," Thran's eyes narrowed. "You think you can stop us? I think the better question is why you're doing this," Sula retorted. "Who convinced you it was a good idea to turn the ship into a reality show?" Thran gave a bitter laugh. "Reality's been a joke ever since the mind merge started frying our brains. Which brings us to you," Arkin said, stepping forward. "You know something. We need to know who's pulling the strings." Thran hesitated, and for a moment Arkin thought he might clench his jaw and tell them to sod off. But then the tension cracked like an old bone. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Thran admitted, voice dropping. "The mind merge was meant to unite us. Make us stronger, better. That's not how it turned out," Sula pointed out. "More like a horror show special." "I know," Thran said, his frustration palpable. "It was supposed to be utopia. Instead, it's a nightmare." Arkin exchanged a glance with Sula. "Who convinced you otherwise?" Thran sighed, rubbing his face. "A scientist back on Earth. They believed the mind merge was the key to a new age. Said they had proof. Guess I was stupid enough to believe them." "Join the club," Sula said dryly. "Membership includes regret and a free t-shirt, so what now?" Thran asked, his posture deflated. "The revolt's in full swing. It's out of my hands." "Not entirely," Arkin said, a plan forming in the back of his mind. "If we can stop fighting long enough to get everyone talking, maybe we can make that utopia happen, or at least less of a dystopian circus." Thran chuckled without humor. "And how do you plan to do that?" "Stage a group therapy session." Sula leaned in, her gaze steady. "We ask the crew to merge minds again." Thran blinked. "You're joking." "I never joke about psychological trauma," Sula replied, deadpan. Arkin nodded. "But this time we do it properly. No sabotage, no hidden agendas, just the truth." Thran looked between them, doubt warring with hope. "You think it can work?" "Can't be worse than what we've got now," Arkin said with a shrug. "Besides, humans are stubborn bastards. We survive." Thran sighed, nodding reluctantly. "All right. I'll do my best to call off the miners." "Great," Sula said. "We'll be at the mind merge chamber. Try not to die on the way." As they made their way back, the ship seemed to breathe easier, like it was daring to hope for a better day. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Back in the bridge, Jorvik was waiting, his expression a cocktail of wariness and hope. "So what's the plan?" "Group mind merge," Arkin replied. "No funny business this time. We need everyone on board." "Sounds like a dream," Jorvik said, his tone only slightly mocking. "A nightmare dream, but still." Myrla glanced up from her console, smirking. "If it doesn't work, we'll just have to revert to good old-fashioned shouting matches." Arkin chuckled. "Or we could just let Brant and Thran arm wrestle for leadership." "Don't tempt me," Jorvik said, shaking his head. "All right, let's get this show on the road." They headed to the mind merge chamber, a sterile room filled with the kind of tech that promised either enlightenment or a massive headache. Probably both, Arkin thought, because life was rarely kind enough to give just one without the other. The crew gathered, faces etched with uncertainty and a sprinkling of defiance. Brant, looking like he was either about to burst with anger or laughter, hard to tell with him, stood at the edge, arms crossed. "You sure about this?" Brant asked, his tone devoid of its usual contempt. "Sure as we can be," Arkin replied. "It's our best shot at stopping this ship from imploding. Or exploding," but he left that unsaid. The mind merge interface hummed to life, a symphony of lights and circuits promising connection and chaos. As they connected, Arkin felt the familiar surge of thoughts, emotions, memories, a tapestry woven from the crew's collective experiences. "All right, everyone," Jorvik's voice came through, steady and commanding. "This is it. No more secrets. No more lies. We are the Eon Voyager and we need to stand together." As the merge took hold, Arkin felt the ship's pulse, its fears, its hopes, its dreams, merging into a coherent whole. It was messy, chaotic, but it was real and human. And in that chaos there was a glimmer of understanding. Sula's voice echoed through the merge. "We've all been hurt. We've all lost. But we're still here. Let's make the most of it." There was a pause, a breathless moment hanging in the balance. Then, like a ripple through still water, came agreement, acceptance. A tentative bond forged in shared survival. The interface powered down, leaving the room silent except for the soft hum of the ship. Faces emerged from the haze of connection. Expressions changed, some hopeful, some wary, but all touched by the experience. "Well, that was something," Brant said, his scowl softened for once. "Let's hope it sticks." "Best we can do," Arkin replied, feeling the weight of the moment lift slightly. Jorvik nodded, his gaze sweeping over the crew. "All right, people. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Let's see if we can make it work." As the crew dispersed, Arkin felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And in a universe that seemed bent on tearing them apart, that was something worth holding on to. Sula nudged him, a weary smile playing on her lips. "Well, partner, looks like we live to fight another day." "Yeah," Arkin replied, chuckling softly. "And maybe this time we can do it without tearing each other to shreds." They stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around them. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was close enough to give them hope. And on the Eon Voyager, that was a victory in itself. After the mind merge, the bridge of the Eon Voyager was a symphony of controlled chaos. And by symphony, we mean a kid banging pots together in a kitchen. Crew members drifted like they'd just crawled out of a particularly grueling episode of reality TV. The ship felt different, like it had taken a collective breath and decided maybe exploding today wasn't on the agenda. Arkin leaned back against a console, the hard edge digging into his spine, a welcome reminder he was alive. Across the room, Sula was busy picking at her nails, a gesture more about giving her restless mind something to do than any concern over personal grooming. The aftermath of their collective head trip was palpable, and everyone was wearing that dazed look of a dog just told it wasn't adoption day after all. "Well," Myrla said, her voice slicing through the air like a well-aimed dart. "That was something. Thought I'd be feeling more enlightened. But instead I just want a stiff drink and a long nap. Preferably not in that order, Doctor." Ordez, sporting a bandage across his forehead from his earlier bar fight with a rogue maintenance bot, nodded. "Enlightenment's overrated. Anyway, we've got more pressing matters, like not dying. Always a top priority," Arkin quipped. "Though on this ship, it feels more like a suggestion." Jorvik, ever the pillar of reluctant optimism, stood at the command center, eyeing the crew like a captain who'd seen his ship through enough storms to know they'd probably get another one tomorrow. "All right, folks," he called out, bringing the room to order with all the gravitas of a man used to dealing with this level of lunacy. "We've had our Kumbaya moment. Now it's time to get practical." Brant grunted in agreement from the corner, his version of a supportive speech. "Good. Maybe now we can stop hugging trees and start hugging common sense." "You're assuming trees would have us," Sula shot back, earning a smirk from Arkin. Jorvik nodded towards the holographic display shimmering on the command console. It flickered like it was trying to decide whether to work or spontaneously combust. "Let's talk structure. We need a leadership team that actually listens. No more surprises." "You mean aside from the ones no one sees coming," Myrla said, fingers dancing over her screen as she worked to unravel the tech mess the miners' rebellion had left in their wake. "Precisely," Jorvik replied, his smile a little frayed but gamely in place. "We need transparency, cooperation. Hell, we need to pretend we like each other." Arkin took the moment to glance around at his fellow survivors. Everyone was battered but breathing, united in the same ragtag fashion of a pirate crew who'd realized the treasure map was drawn by a drunkard. "So, who wants to lead our merry band of misfits? Thran's been promising change," Brant said, attempting a shrug that made him look like a malfunctioning android. He might actually mean it now. Thran, having lingered like a shadow at the back, finally stepped forward. His typical demeanor of grumpy miner had softened into something approaching reluctant diplomat. "Here's the thing," he said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I didn't exactly ask for this gig, but if we're going to pull this off, we need to start by fixing what's broken, and that starts with us." "Great," Sula said dryly. "Step 1, stop breaking things. Step 2, Arkin added, figure out what the hell Step 2 is." For the first time, Arkin noticed a ripple of agreement among the crew. It was the kind of moment that felt like a bell ringing, a ding heralding the slow return to sanity, or at least as close as this ship would ever get. "All right," Jorvik said, determined. "Thran, you take the lead. Myrla, keep us from sinking any further. Dr. Ordez, patch up whoever still thinks headbutting walls is a good idea. Arkin, Sula, you're our diplomats. Try not to start any more wars." "Not exactly what I signed up for," Arkin muttered, though there was a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "We're all doing things we didn't sign up for," Thran replied, his expression softening into something approaching camaraderie. "Welcome to life aboard the Eon Voyager." And so, over the weeks that followed, the crew of the Eon Voyager began to stitch themselves back together. It wasn't pretty, mostly because they were using metaphorical duct tape and prayers more than actual sewing skills. But they moved forward, one painstaking step at a time, like a toddler learning to walk while juggling chainsaws. The ship's corridors, once a claustrophobic nightmare of flickering lights and tripping hazards, started to feel a little less like they were trying to kill everyone. Maintenance bots were coaxed back to life, their circuits reluctantly agreeing to behave if only to avoid another encounter with Ordez's wrench. Thran turned out to be a decent leader, once he got over the urge to smash everything with a mining pick. He proved adept at navigating the fragile egos and stubborn streaks of the other miners, who were slowly convinced that maybe a mutiny wasn't the best way to get better meal rations. Myrla became the unofficial tech guru, her fingers flickering over screens like a maestro conducting an orchestra composed entirely of malfunctioning violins. It was her tenacity that wrestled the ship's communication systems back online, an act akin to teaching a cat to bark. For Arkin and Sula, the role of diplomats was a never-ending game of balancing acts, like spinning plates while the ground beneath them threatened to give way at any moment. They became the bridge between the crew's disparate factions, smoothing ruffled feathers and occasionally knocking heads together when words weren't enough. The mind-merge sessions became a regular affair, conducted with all the enthusiasm of a root canal, but promising valuable insights. Each session chipped away at the walls people had built, leaving them begrudgingly admitting that maybe, just maybe, they needed each other after all. In the quiet moments, usually over a shared meal of questionable protein paste, Arkin and Sula would reflect on the strangeness of it all, the absurdity of being trapped in a box hurtling through space with the same people you'd once considered throttling. "Funny how things turn out," Arkin remarked one evening, shoveling a spoonful of grayish sludge into his mouth. It tasted like despair but had the nutritional value of cardboard, so there was that. Sula grimaced at her own meal before responding. "Never thought I'd be grateful for a botched mind-merge experiment, but here we are not killing each other." "High bar," Arkin said, chuckling. "But we cleared it." "Yeah," Sula replied, her tone softening. "Guess that's one for the win column." The Eon Voyager, once a ship teetering on the brink of destruction, began to earn its place as a home again. There were still struggles, still moments of discord, but they were met with a resilience that had been absent before. The crew's collective trauma hadn't vanished, but it had transformed, becoming a bond, a shared history that reminded them of their humanity in the void of space. As the ship continued its journey, Arkin often found himself wondering about the future. It was a nebulous concept, one fraught with uncertainty and the potential for both disaster and discovery. "Think we'll ever actually reach that new world?" he asked Sula one day as they stood in the observation bay, watching the stars streak past with the indifference only celestial bodies could muster. Sula leaned against the railing, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Maybe, or maybe this is it, our own little corner of the universe." Arkin nodded, considering. "Could be worse, I suppose." "Definitely worse," Sula agreed. "Though I wouldn't mind a beach." "Always with the beaches," Arkin teased, nudging her shoulder. She nudged back, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Hey, a girl can dream." And with that they stood in companionable silence, the ship beneath them thrumming with life and promise. It was a precarious piece, one built on the backs of people who'd fought tooth and nail for their place in the cosmos. But it was theirs, and maybe that was enough. In the end, the Eon Voyager continued its voyage, not as a fractured collection of individuals, but as a cohesive whole, forged from adversity and bound by the shared hope of a new dawn. For in the grim darkness of space, amid the chaos and uncertainty, the human spirit proved to be an unyielding light.